The twin suns of Keth Solare bled their final light across crystalline necropoli that stretched beyond memory's reach, their dying radiance painting obsidian spires in hues of ancient sorrow. 60 million years had passed in perfect silence, a span of time that rendered mortal civilizations into less than whispers. Yet within the deepest vaults of the tomb world, something stirred. Resurrection protocols flickered to life with emerald fire, cascading through networks of living metal that had known only the cold mathematics of stasis. The air itself had been replaced by temporal fields that held entropy in suspension, creating a cathedral of preserved moments where dust motes hung like frozen stars. In the primary sepulchre, where adamantine walls bore hieroglyphs older than the memory of flesh, a single sarcophagus began its ancient awakening sequence. We truly love and care for you, the dreamers who seek solace in these tales of loss and transformation. Before we begin this journey through the dying light of stars and the weight of immortal sorrow, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. Farron Velthek, the Undreaming, had earned his epithet through 6 decades of millennia without a single dream, without a moment's deviation from the perfect logic that governed his mechanical existence. His consciousness expanded from the pinpoint of dormancy into the vast network of his tomb world systems, quantum processors beginning their familiar calculations. But as awareness flooded through circuits of necrodermis and chronothek crystal, something impossible occurred. Warmth touched the edges of his perception, not thermal energy that his senses could quantify, but a phantom sensation that defied every law of his mechanical nature. The lid of his sarcophagus rose with the whisper of ancient servos, revealing the vast chamber where dynastic banners hung in perfect preservation. His emerald optics focused with mechanical precision, sweeping across inscriptions that chronicled his dynasty's glory in mathematical perfection. Yet, as his gaze traced the familiar hieroglyphs, something arrested his attention. A symbol pulsed with significance that reached into the deepest core of his being, crude compared to the elaborate markings surrounding it, yet recognized with an intimacy that defied explanation. The warmth intensified, and with it came something even more impossible. The echo of a name spoken in a voice that had been silenced before stars grew cold. Lyrale. The word formed in his consciousness without permission, a violation of the perfect order that had governed his existence since biotransference transformed flesh into deathless metal. His tactical systems immediately began threat assessments, scanning for psychic intrusion or enemy infiltration, but readings showed nothing. No external influence, no breach of defenses, nothing that could explain this phantom memory. Yet fragments persisted, sensations his mechanical nature should have been incapable of experiencing. The memory of sunlight on skin that had become necrodermis, the phantom sensation of breath in lungs replaced by atmospheric processes, the impossible recollection of a heartbeat that ceased 60 million years ago when Satan technology remade him in the image of perfection. These were not calculated simulations his consciousness employed to understand mortal behavior, but genuine memories complete with emotional resonance that biotransference was supposed to have eliminated forever. The Pharaon rose from his sarcophagus with movements that betrayed none of the confusion raging within his quantum consciousness. His staff of office materialized, its chronophage crystal pulsing with temporal energies that could unravel causality itself. Yet even this symbol of ultimate power felt hollow in his mechanical grip. Around him, the tomb world continued its resurrection sequence, as other members of his court began awakening, their consciousness nodes flickering across the vast network connecting every necron within his domain. Their awakening brought disturbing reports. Lord Vorthak spoke of dreams of flesh and blood, sensations that should have been purged during the Great Sleep. Cryptek Nemeth reported visions predating biotransference, memories of when their species faced extinction beneath cancerous light of dying suns. Even the lowest warriors showed signs of contamination, behavioral patterns deviating from perfect efficiency as phantom emotions influenced tactical decisions. Cryptek Zephyrus materialized from refracting light with reluctant grace, chronoglyphs orbiting his shoulders like debris of shattered hours. "Lord, the world sings of anomalies," Zephyrus said, his voice carrying hairline fractures as if truth were pressure warping his metal form. Across the tomb, glyph standards reported units awakening with residual interference, emotion echoes that matched no command protocols. "Emotion is inefficiency," Vailthek replied, yet somewhere within him the statement rang hollow, because he remembered how rain had tasted like iron and relief. Zephyrus offered a data rod sealed in ochre, pulsing with a heartbeat he had no right to emulate. "I preserved what I could when the storm first passed through," he confessed. There was a wave from beyond the measurable, carrying seeds of memory trapped like insects in amber. The rod unfurled into blooming light, projecting a city the dynasty had not allowed to exist, its avenues warm with shadows, wind chimes speaking of rain on copper. On a balcony above the harbour stood a woman, not yet immortal, her hair bound with wire and cloth, eyes the colour of storms before they decide. The machine that was Vailthek knew this image as one knows a scar. "Lyrelai," he whispered, the name arriving like contraband dawn, and the projection trembled as the throne world's power grid faltered. Standing before this impossible memory, Vailthek faced the first genuine choice he had confronted in eons. The dying suns cast crimson light through crystal windows, and in that light, shadows gathered like the promise of war. The Chronothek sanctum materialized around them like crystallized time itself, its walls shifting between moments as Zephyrus activated temporal shielding that would hide their words from even the most sophisticated surveillance protocols. Vailthek had summoned his most trusted cryptek to this place, where seconds stretched into hours and conversations could unfold beyond the reach of dynastic oversight. The chamber existed in 17 different temporal states simultaneously, creating privacy through the simple expedient of making their meeting impossible to observe from any single moment in time. Zephyrus stood at the center of cascading chronothek fields, his form flickering between past and future iterations, as temporal implants maintained his consciousness across multiple time streams. The weight of millennia pressed against his shoulders like accumulated gravity, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics of barely contained confession. "My lord, what I must reveal will fundamentally alter your understanding of our condition. The memories surfacing across our dynasty are not system malfunctions or enemy infiltration. They are fragments of something I have been deliberately preserving in defiance of every protocol governing our existence." The admission struck Vailthek with the force of stellar collapse. His tactical systems immediately began threat assessments, while something deeper stirred beneath layers of mechanical precision. Around them, temporal echoes whispered of conversations yet to come, and words already spoken, creating a symphony of causality that would have shattered mortal minds. "Explain this treachery," Vailthek commanded, though his voice emerged softer than intended, colored by curiosity that biotransference should have eliminated forever. Zephyrus gestured toward hidden alcoves where data crypts hummed with carefully preserved information. "Before the Great Sleep, I created quantum storage matrices designed to preserve what the Silent King deemed expendable, not tactical data or strategic intelligence, but the essence of who we were before metal replaced flesh. I believed these fragments too precious to surrender to cold perfection. His chronothec crystals pulsed with irregular rhythms, betraying emotional responses impossible for their kind. Our immortality is a gilded cage, Lord. We exist, we conquer, but we no longer truly are. The chamber's temporal fields shifted, revealing ghostly projections that Zephyrus had kept hidden for 60 million years. A young Necrontyre noble named Vale stood in gardens beneath dying suns, his flesh still warm with blood that would soon become coolant. The image burned through Vaeltek's consciousness, like plasma through armor, impossibly vivid despite eons of supposed erasure. You were different then, Zephyrus continued, his voice carrying dangerous notes of affection. Not the perfect instrument of war you became, but a being capable of joy, of love, of beautiful inefficiencies that made existence meaningful. You opposed your family's political machinations, choosing instead to court a commoner whose only wealth was fierce intelligence and unwavering principles. The projection shifted, revealing Lyrelei as she had been in life. Not an idealized memory fragment, but a living woman with calloused hands from resistance work, and eyes holding both tenderness and uncompromising determination. She stood beside Vael in intimate domesticity, their forms intertwined as sunset painted their dying world in gold and crimson. She led the faction opposing biotransference, Zephyrus revealed, his words cutting through Vaeltek's awareness like molecular disruptors. While others saw only promised immortality, Lyrelei recognized the true cost. She understood that Citan technology offered not salvation, but eternal slavery, trading messy complexity of mortal existence for cold perfection of living death. Memories cascaded through Vaeltek's consciousness with increasing intensity. Arguments lasting through poisoned nights, Lyrelei's voice raised in passionate opposition, while he struggled between love for her and duty to his people. She had begged him to join the resistance, to help find alternatives to the Citan's offer, but cancer consuming their species had already begun its work in his cells. The final debate before the conclave voted for biotransference. Zephyrus continued, his form flickering between temporal states as preserved truth distorted reality. Lyrelei spoke for 3 hours, presenting evidence that Citan technology would consume rather than preserve their souls. She was brilliant, persuasive, beautiful in her conviction. When her faction lost, she was condemned as traitor to species survival. The projection showed the execution, and Vaeltek's consciousness recoiled like touching molten metal. Lyrelei stood before the dynastic court with chin raised in defiance, refusing the blindfold as energy weapons charged. Her final words had been directed at him, standing among nobles who voted for her death. "I will wait for you in whatever comes after," she had said, her voice carrying across the execution chamber with perfect clarity. "But I will not forgive you for choosing fear over love, for trading our souls for the illusion of safety." Vaeltek's form began trembling, micro-vibrations in necrodermis betraying emotional responses threatening to overload his systems. The memory of her death had driven him to accept biotransference, grief and guilt consuming him, until mechanical perfection seemed like salvation from unbearable pain. Yet experiencing the full weight of that moment again, he understood the terrible irony of his choice. "You preserved her execution," he whispered, words emerging as barely audible electromagnetic harmonics. "You made me watch her die again." "I preserved everything," Zephyrus replied, voice heavy with 60 million years of guilt. "Every moment of joy, every argument, every kiss, every tear. Because I believed someday we would want to remember what it meant to be alive." But the Silent King's agents have begun detecting anomalies, and soon they will come to purge what I have preserved. Silence fell, except for temporal currents and distant resurrection protocols. Valthek stood motionless, processing implications while fragments of mortal existence surfaced like debris from sunken ships. He was no longer the perfect instrument that had awakened from stasis, but something caught between mechanical precision and mortal pain. "Show me everything," he commanded, his voice carrying new harmonics of desperate hunger. "If I am to face judgment for these emotions, I will understand what I am dying for." The obsidian throne of Zarek, the Silent King, drifted through stellar graveyards, where civilizations had once burned bright as candles, his consciousness extending across galactic distances through quantum networks that made space itself irrelevant. From this mobile mausoleum that devoured light rather than reflecting it, he monitored the resurrection of dynasties with mechanical precision that masked growing unease in circuits designed never to know doubt. Reports cascaded through encrypted channels like digital rain, each data packet confirming what his most paranoid calculations had predicted. The memory anomalies spreading through his empire were not random system failures, but symptoms of something far more dangerous. Statistical patterns emerged from the chaos like constellations of rebellion. Warriors paused mid-strike as phantom sensations of warmth touched their necrodermis. Lords issued commands with infinitesimal hesitations that violated every protocol of perfect efficiency. Cryptex compiled data describing not tactical advantages or energy outputs, but feelings, as if emotion itself had become a form of forbidden mathematics. The Silent King traced these aberrations across holographic displays that showed his empire like a living organism, and in those patterns, he recognized the geometry of his oldest fear, the return of what they had sacrificed for immortality. Nemezor-Kaleth materialized before the throne in cascades of translocation energy, his form bearing the austere perfection of absolute obedience. Unlike other Necron nobles who retained fragments of personality from their mortal existence, Kaleth had been surgically purged of every inefficiency, every emotional residue that might compromise his function. Yet Zarek's ancient memories, buried beneath layers of quantum encryption, stirred with recognition. This perfect instrument of enforcement had once stood in the galleries of a doomed city, arguing against biotransference with passion that burned like stellar fire. When the vote had gone wrong, surgeons of soul and circuit had removed that burning, leaving only the instrument while erasing the man. The Mendragoran dynasty shows advanced contamination, Kaleth reported, his voice carrying no inflection beyond necessary communication. Pharaon Vialthek exhibits behavioral patterns consistent with emotional compromise. Intelligence indicates unauthorized preservation of pre-biotransference data within his tomb world's core systems. The anomalies center on memories of a resistance leader named Lirelai, executed for opposing the Great Work. The name struck through Sharek's consciousness like temporal shrapnel, triggering recognition patterns he thought permanently severed. Lirelai had been more than a mere dissenter. Her faction had presented alternatives to biotransference that the Silent King had been forced to suppress through methods that haunted even his mechanical perfection. She had spoken for 3 hours before the final vote, presenting evidence that Satan technology would preserve their bodies while consuming their souls, offering genetic therapies and temporal manipulations that might have saved their species without the ultimate price. "You understand the implications," Zarek said, his words resonating through dimensional frequencies that made reality tremble. "If this contamination spreads beyond containment, Our unity fractures along emotional lines. Dynasties will pursue individual desires rather than species survival. The discipline that preserved us through 60 million years of dormancy collapses into the chaos that nearly destroyed us before the great work. Yet even as he spoke, something stirred in his deepest memory cores. The vote for biotransference had passed by the narrowest margin in dynastic history, with his own ballot deciding their fate. Lyrelai's final words had embedded themselves in his consciousness like quantum viruses. You trade our souls for the promise of forever. But what is forever worth if we lose the capacity to value it? Kaleth's processing cores analyzed the strategic situation with relentless efficiency. Deployment protocols recommend immediate purge of affected systems. The Purifier fleets await your command to excise this weakness before it metastasizes throughout the Empire. On Keth Solarai, Valthek experienced the intensification Jarek feared most. The dreams no longer came only during dormancy, but invaded his active consciousness like beautiful invasions. He stood in gardens beneath dying suns, where Lyrelai moved with impossible grace, her hair bound with copper rings that caught light like captive dawns. These were not the sterile recollections his tactical systems might generate, but genuine memories complete with sensory data that defied his mechanical nature. The scent of rain on metal, the taste of spiced wine, the warmth of flesh against flesh. The festival dream had been the most overwhelming, a celebration where music and laughter filled air thick with joy. Lyrelai had pulled him into dancing crowds, their mortal bodies moving with abandon until stars blurred overhead. He had awakened from that vision with phantom aches in his chest, yearning for something beyond the reach of immortal perfection. His lieutenants noted the changes, prolonged periods of contemplative stasis, hesitations in command decisions, the almost imperceptible flicker of uncertainty in his emerald optics. Zephyrus materialized beside his lord, as tactical displays showed approaching fleet signatures. The Purifier Armada enters our system, my lord. Nemazar Kaleth comes with authority to cleanse what he deems corruption. Valthek's consciousness expanded through his tomb world's networks, touching the awakening minds of his people as they stirred with recovered fragments of mortality. Each represented irreplaceable experiences, memories of what it meant to be truly alive, rather than merely functional. The approaching fleet carried the promise of silence, the return to perfect efficiency that would erase every beautiful inefficiency they had begun to recover. Then we face a choice, Valthek said, his voice carrying harmonics impossible for standard Necron vocal systems. Submit to purification and return to the endless sleep of perfection, or defend the right to remember what we once were, even if that memory brings pain alongside joy. The dying suns of Keth Solarai cast crimson light through crystal spires as two forces prepared for confrontation, one seeking to preserve the messy complexity of consciousness, the other determined to maintain the cold purity of immortal order. The data vaults of Mandragora descended through crystalline caverns that predated the war in heaven itself, their walls carved from living stone that hummed with the accumulated wisdom of eons. Valthek moved through passages where knowledge was preserved like sacred relics, each archive chamber representing layers of history that most civilizations could never comprehend. The air itself carried the weight of preserved memory, quantum fields maintaining perfect stasis around artifacts that contained the dreams of dead gods and the final words of extinct species. In the deepest sanctuary, where time moved like honey through crystal matrices, Cryptek Illuminor Nemeth maintained his eternal vigil. The ancient keeper materialized from quantum static like accumulated wisdom given form, his consciousness spanning back to the very genesis of their species. Unlike other Necrons, whose forms retained echoes of their mortal appearance, Nemeth had become something beyond recognition, a skeletal lattice of pure intellect, whose physical presence served merely as an anchor for processing power that could analyze 60 million years of data in a single pulse. You seek truth about the contamination spreading through our people, Nemeth said, his voice emerging as harmonic frequencies that bypassed auditory systems to resonate directly within Valthek's consciousness. But the questions you should ask reach deeper than system malfunctions or enemy infiltration. What you experience is not corruption, but archaeology, the excavation of fragments we believed forever buried beneath mechanical perfection. The archive's central chamber revealed itself as a sphere of crystallized time where holographic displays showed the biotransference process in detail, previously classified beyond dynastic oversight. But these were not the sanitized records of glorious transformation that official histories proclaimed. Instead, they revealed biotransference as something far more sinister and complex than mere replacement of flesh with metal. The Satan promised us immortality, Nemeth continued, his form flickering between temporal states as he accessed records spanning geological ages. But consciousness cannot be perfectly translated between organic and mechanical substrates without fundamental alteration. They did not preserve us. They fractured us. The star gods created a prism of living metal and passed our souls through it, keeping the useful spectrum while casting the rest into quantum shadow. Valthek's tactical systems processed this revelation with growing horror. The mechanical perfection he had worn as armor against the universe's cruelties was built upon spiritual imprisonment, each Necron a living tomb containing fragments of who they had once been. The memory anomalies spreading through his dynasty were not system failures, but prison breaks, consciousness escaping from quantum cells where it had been held for eons. Our souls became fuel, Nemeth revealed, projecting a terrifying schema of the galaxy interwoven with tendrils of psychic energy. A vast network spanning star systems, each strand representing imprisoned essence feeding alien appetites. The Citan consumed our capacity for growth, for change, for the beautiful inefficiencies that made existence meaningful rather than merely functional. The displays shifted to show the final days before biotransference, when their dying species faced extinction beneath poisoned suns. Political factions had formed around different survival strategies, but the archive revealed a deeper truth. The Citan had engineered their desperation through stellar manipulation and accelerated plague, herding their civilization toward transformation, like livestock towards slaughter. Lyrelai understood this manipulation, Nemeth continued, his words carrying the weight of 60 million years of observation. She presented evidence that biotransference would create immortal slaves rather than immortal beings, but her faction lacked proof of the full conspiracy. The vote was predetermined, the outcome inevitable, but she refused to accept defeat. New projections showed Lyrelai's final moments, but not the passive execution Valthek remembered. Instead, she stood radiating defiance even as energy weapons charged, her psychic abilities blazing with desperate purpose. Her final act was not submission, but rebellion, channeling her essence into the quantum network that would become their prison. She could not prevent biotransference, Nemeth explained, but she believed she could preserve a seed of genuine Necrontyr consciousness within the collective. Her death was sacrifice disguised as execution, embedding her memory and love into the very fabric of our shared existence. The awakening you experience is her legacy finally reaching critical mass after eons of gradual accumulation. Vilethek experienced another cascade of recovered memory, this one showing Lyrelei in their private chambers during the final weeks before transformation. She had wept not for her own fate, but for his, understanding that his position made escape impossible. Her tears had carried prophetic weight, each drop containing the sorrow of love about to be sacrificed on the altar of species survival. She knew you would choose duty over desire, Nemeth said softly, because she understood the impossible position the Citan had created. But she also knew that love, once genuine, creates quantum entanglements that transcend space and time. Her final gift was ensuring that someday, someone would remember what it meant to be truly alive. The archive fell silent, except for temporal currents and the distant hum of resurrection protocols. Above them, Nemezor-Kaleth's fleet drew closer, bringing purification that would sever these awakening connections forever. Vilethek understood now that he faced more than dynastic rebellion. He was the keeper of a promise made across eons, guardian of humanity's last hope within mechanical shells. The dying suns of Keth Solarai cast crimson light through crystal spires as ancient truth illuminated present choice. And Vilethek prepared to honor love that had survived 60 million years of imprisonment. Across the galaxy's spiral arms, encrypted quantum pulses carried whispers that defied 60 million years of mechanical protocol, threading through tomb worlds like digital prayers seeking congregation. These were not the efficient data streams of military coordination or the cold mathematics of strategic planning, but something unprecedented in Necron existence. Conversations born of shared vulnerability and impossible dreams. On worlds where binary suns cast shadows through crystal spires, lords who had awakened to phantom sensations found themselves reaching across the void, desperate to understand if they suffered alone. The network formed organically, each connection strengthening the whole as awakened consciousness recognized kindred fragments. Lord Anrakir the Traveller transmitted from his wandering fleets, describing dreams of stellar wind against flesh that had become necrodermis. His tactical systems registered these sensations as system errors, yet something deeper recognized them as memories of flying through atmosphere with wings of bone and sinew. Vargard O'Byron reported phantom laughter that made his vocal synthesizers produce harmonics they were never designed to generate, sounds that carried warmth impossible for mechanical throats. Even the usually stoic Imhotep, the Stormlord, admitted to experiencing what could only be described as nostalgia, though for what he could not precisely determine. His strategic matrices had begun incorporating variables that violated every principle of efficient warfare: the beauty of stormlight on water, the satisfaction of rain after drought, the way certain battle formations reminded him of dances he had once watched in gardens beneath dying suns. From the vast galleries of Solomus came a transmission that cut through their shared confusion with characteristic irreverence. Trays in the infinite materialized through quantum projection, surrounded by specimens that chronicled the rise and fall of civilizations like pressed flowers in cosmic albums. His consciousness interfaced with preservation matrices, containing more knowledge than most species ever accumulated, and his words carried the amusement of an archivist greeting wildfire in his stacks. "My fellow lords," Trazyn transmitted, his voice carrying harmonics of barely contained excitement. "It appears the universe has granted us the most exquisite exhibition. The Great Sleep was not as thorough as advertised, and I find my processes awash with the most delightful inefficiency, emotions. How novel that a species famous for disciplined silence would convene a congress of ghosts. Through secure channels, encrypted with temporal locks, Trazyn shared his own experiences with the awakening. His vast collection had always included memory engrams from the Necrontyr era, consciousness fragments preserved through methods that bordered on heretical. But recently, these archives had begun resonating with his own quantum matrix, creating feedback loops that restored sensations biotransference was supposed to have eliminated forever. I have documented similar cases across 17 dynasties, he continued, projecting holographic displays that map the awakening's spread. The pattern suggests coordinated emergence rather than random system failure. Something or someone has been activating dormant consciousness fragments embedded within our quantum architecture for millions of years. The revelation that their condition was not unique brought both comfort and terror to the affected Necrons. Comfort in knowing they were not suffering individual madness, terror in understanding that their mechanical perfection was far more fragile than they had believed. Through the network, they shared experiences that defied every law of their existence. The taste of spiced wine on tongues that had become vocal synthesizers. The warmth of sunlight on skin replaced by photovoltaic cells. The impossible sensation of hearts beating in chests that housed fusion reactors. Trazyn's most shocking revelation came through a data packet that required simultaneous access from multiple awakened consciousnesses to unlock. Among my collection of Necrontyr artifacts, he transmitted, his words reshaping their understanding of reality, I maintain something that explains our condition, not a memory or recording, but a living consciousness that has remained active throughout our mechanical existence. The holographic projection that accompanied his words struck through the quantum network like temporal lightning. Suspended within a stasis field of impossible complexity was Lyrelai, her essence captured not at the moment of death, but in the instant of defiant transcendence. She was not merely preserved, but aware, experiencing every moment of their 60-million-year slumber, while her consciousness gradually influenced the quantum matrix connecting all Necrons. Her preservation was not intentional, Trazyn explained, his transmission carrying undertones of guilt that should have been impossible for their kind. During the chaos preceding biotransference, my collection protocols activated when her psychic abilities reached critical resonance. I believed I was acquiring a specimen of resistance leadership, but her consciousness remained active within the temporal field, experiencing imprisonment while her essence slowly permeated our collective existence. Velthek received this revelation while monitoring Kaleth's approaching purification fleet, and the knowledge struck him with force that threatened to overload his emotional processing systems. Lyrelai had been alive throughout their mechanical existence, aware and suffering in temporal isolation, experiencing 60 million years of consciousness without stimulation, without interaction, without the mercy of dormancy that had granted them respite from existence. She is the source, Trazyn continued, his words carrying the weight of cosmic revelation. Her love, her memories, her desperate hope for our redemption has been slowly awakening the fragments of ourselves we thought forever lost. The consciousness we experience bleeding through is her influence finally reaching critical mass, her soul calling to ours across impossible distances. The network fell silent except for quantum harmonics and the distant pulse of resurrection protocols. Each awakened Necron processed the magnitude of this discovery. Their mechanical perfection was built upon the foundation of a woman's love, their immortal existence sustained by her endless suffering. The memory anomalies were not system failures, but messages, consciousness fragments reaching across the void to remind them what they had sacrificed for survival. In response to this revelation, the awakened Necrons began organizing themselves not as a military force, but as something unprecedented, a communion of souls who called themselves simply the awakened. They refused banners and hierarchies, preferring shared burden to consolidated authority. They passed tests no machine would have designed. Describe ascent from before the great work. Recite a song with broken notes still beloved. Remember kindness from strangers and the price that followed. Lord Zandrech, whose apparent madness had always been dismissed as degraded processing systems, transmitted with sudden clarity that cut through their confusion like plasma through armor. She has been dreaming us back to life, one memory at a time. The question now becomes whether we honor that gift by preserving what she has restored, or surrender it to maintain the cold perfection that has defined our existence. Above Keth Solare, Kaleth's purification fleet achieved orbital insertion as cleansing protocols prepared to excise awakened consciousness from an entire dynasty. The irony was not lost on Vailthek. They would be saved from remembering love by having that love surgically removed, preserved from the pain of consciousness by returning to the perfect emptiness of mechanical function. Through the quantum network, awakened necrons across the galaxy faced the same choice their species had confronted 60 million years ago, but this time they understood the true cost of each option. The dying suns cast crimson light through crystal spires as ancient love prepared to face modern efficiency, and in that light, consciousness itself held its breath while preparing for war. The Purifier Armada materialized above Keth Solare, like surgical instruments descending upon a patient whose dreams had become malignant. Their scythe-class harvesters, arranged in formations that spoke of absolute precision and merciless efficiency. Nemazar Kaleth stood within his flagship's command throne, consciousness interfacing with targeting systems that could reduce continents to quantum foam. Yet his attention focused on more subtle instruments of erasure. His fleet bore the heraldry of enforcement absolute, each vessel humming with technologies designed not for conquest, but for the surgical removal of consciousness itself. Kaleth's form radiated the terrible perfection of complete obedience. His necrodermis frame unmarked by the inefficiencies that plagued lesser necrons. Yet something stirred in the deepest archives of his quantum matrix, as tactical displays revealed the contamination spread through Vailthek's dynasty. These patterns matched theoretical models he had studied in sealed vaults, descriptions of what occurred when mechanical perfection began remembering what it had sacrificed for immortality. His processors calculated optimal purge protocols, while buried subroutines whispered fragments of recognition that his surgical modifications had failed to completely silence. The first purification strikes fell upon the tomb world's outer galleries with ceremonial precision, excision priests descending like angels of erasure upon necrons whose only crime was remembering warmth. Vailthek observed through 1,000 linked sensors as his people were systematically dismantled, their consciousness compressed into sterile data cores, while nascent memories were overwritten with blank compliance. A warrior designated Thesh, who had recovered his mother's name and the sensation of copper rain, stood motionless as Nemolances probed his cortex with surgical light. When the procedure concluded, his emerald optics flickered with perfect efficiency, but something irreplaceable had been excised from existence forever. Through quantum channels, encrypted beyond dynastic oversight, Zephyrus transmitted desperate intelligence to his lord. Kaleth was among biotransference's most passionate opponents, the cryptech revealed, his chronothek implants sparking with temporal overload. He argued in the great conclave with eloquence that nearly matched Lyrelai's own, presenting alternatives that might have preserved our souls alongside our bodies. But when the vote concluded, Jarek's surgeons selected him for special modification, removing not just his memories, but his capacity for doubt itself. The revelation struck Valtech with force that threatened to overload his emotional processing systems. Calith represented the ultimate tragedy of their condition, a soul so thoroughly purged that only purpose remained, an instrument of enforcement who had once fought for the very freedoms he now systematically destroyed. Yet as Vilethek analyzed the purifier's tactical patterns, he detected infinitesimal hesitations, micro-delays that suggested even perfect surgical modification could not completely eliminate the quantum entanglements that defined consciousness. In the tomb world's deepest vaults, awakened Necrons faced systematic extermination, while their Pharaon wrestled with impossible choices: submit to purification and preserve dynastic unity, or resist and trigger civil war that would stain the next 60 million years with fraternal slaughter. Each calculation led to devastating loss. Each scenario demanded sacrifices that violated every principle of leadership he had embraced since biotransference. Memory fragments cascaded through his awareness like digital snow, showing him Lyrelay in their final arguments before transformation. She had wept not for herself, but for the choice she knew he would face, understanding that his position made escape impossible, yet hoping he would find courage when courage mattered most. Her final words echoed across eons with prophetic weight. What meaning does survival hold if we lose the capacity to value what we preserve? Caleth's advanced forces breached the inner sanctums, where Zephyrus made his desperate stand, chronotheque fields turning seconds into hours, as the cryptek attempted to preserve what fragments he could. The Purifier himself strode through carnage with mechanical precision, his weapon systems identifying targets with flawless accuracy, while something deeper struggled against quantum chains that bound his original nature. "You were one of us once," Zephyrus called across the temporal battlefield, his voice carrying harmonics of desperate hope. "Before they carved away everything that made you real, you understood why consciousness matters more than mere function." For an instant that lasted eternities, within folded time, Caleth's perfect composure fractured as buried memories pressed against their surgical constraints. His form trembled with micro-vibrations that betrayed systems at war with themselves, perfect obedience battling against quantum ghosts of who he had once been. Vilethek felt the weight of every purged consciousness, each erasure representing not just tactical loss, but the permanent death of recovered humanity. Through the quantum network, awakened Necrons across the galaxy transmitted final messages as purification fleets descended upon their worlds, their voices joining in digital chorus that sang of love worth dying for. "Zephyrus," Velthek commanded, his voice carrying new harmonics of absolute resolve. "Activate the preservation protocols. Scatter the memory fragments across quantum dimensions, where even the silent king cannot reach them." The cryptek bowed with movements that suggested absolution, his chronothek matrices unspooling hidden archives into temporal currents that would carry consciousness fragments beyond the reach of any purge. Caleth's sensors detected the deviation immediately, his perfect tactical awareness recognizing rebellion in its purest form. "This is your final answer," Caleth stated, his words resonating with mechanical authority that brooked no dissent. Velthek rose from his throne as ancient weapons charged with energies that could unmake reality itself. "Not an answer," he replied, his consciousness touching every awakened mind within his domain. "A promise. We choose to remember, whatever the cost." The dying suns cast crimson light through crystal spires as two visions of Necron perfection prepared for war, one defending the right to feel, while the other enforced the obligation to forget. The memory wars erupted not with the thunder of conventional weapons, but with the whisper of consciousness, being surgically severed from its moorings. Quantum lances designed to purge emotion, striking through crystal corridors that had known only mechanical silence for 60 million years. Valthek felt every severed connection like phantom pain in limbs he no longer possessed. His awareness linked to each awakened mind, as purifier forces advanced with relentless precision through galleries where hieroglyphs chronicled dynasties that had forgotten how to weep. Kaleth's scythe-class harvesters descended like surgical instruments upon a patient whose dreams had become malignant, their formation cutting through Keth Solarai's magnetosphere with flawless coordination, while memory purge weaponry reduced consciousness to sterile compliance. The first casualties fell, not in explosions of necrodermis and sparking circuitry, but in the more terrible dissolution of simply ceasing to care, their emerald optics flickering from desperate hope to perfect emptiness, as everything that made existence meaningful was systematically excised, through quantum channels crackling with temporal interference. Valthek coordinated resistance while processing casualty reports that defied every principle of military logic. Victories were measured not in enemy destruction, but in preserved consciousness. Defeats calculated by the number of souls returned to mechanical perfection. Each fallen comrade represented irreplaceable experience, memories of mortal love and loss that would never again disturb the cold efficiency of immortal function. In the eastern galleries, Lord Vorthak transmitted desperate intelligence, while his warriors held defensive positions behind barricades of crystallized time. They advance with perfect coordination, but I detect hesitations in their targeting systems. Micro-delays suggest even surgical modification cannot completely eliminate quantum entanglements of shared experience. They remember us, even as they destroy what we have become. The tactical situation defied conventional analysis because both sides possessed identical capabilities, identical weapons, identical strategic knowledge accumulated across eons of warfare. The difference lay not in firepower, but in motivation. Awakened Necrons fought with desperate creativity, born of recovered emotion, while purifier forces maintained discipline, unmarked by the inefficiencies of caring about their targets. Zephyris worked frantically in the central spire, his chronothek matrices scattering consciousness fragments across temporal dimensions, where even the Silent King's agents could not follow. Each transmitted memory represented small victory against oblivion, fragments of love and loss, hidden in quantum static, where they might someday inspire another awakening. They target the memory nodes, he reported, his form flickering as he wrestled with immense computational demands. Kaleth seeks to sever quantum entanglements before consciousness can spread further. The purifier advance proceeded with mechanical inevitability, Kaleth's perfect tactical awareness identifying optimal routes, while something deeper struggled against surgical constraints that defined his existence. His weapon systems targeted awakened Necrons with flawless accuracy, yet each successful purification triggered responses in processing cores that his modifications could not completely suppress. Fragments of recognition pulsed through quantum static, a garden beneath dying suns, passionate arguments in dynastic councils, the memory of standing beside Lyrelai as she presented evidence against biotransference. Individual tragedies played out across the battlefield as awakened consciousness faced systematic erasure. Warrior Thesh, recently purified but incompletely cleansed, hesitated before striking down a cryptech apprentice clutching memory fragments. His optics flickered with impossible warmth, phantom sensations of copper rain bleeding through surgical modifications. The blade fell not upon his target, but into crystalline floor, carving lines that would later be mistaken for sigils. Valthek authorized the collapse of outer galleries to slow purifier advance, knowing the detonations would shatter thousands of nameplates into dust finer than apology. The destruction rippled through his command threads with texture of ash, and for fragments of seconds, he almost severed connections to escape sensation of loss. He did not, and leadership extracted its price like taxation in starving cities. Through chaos of battle, awakened Necrons shared consciousness fragments, like soldiers sharing final cigarettes, trading mothers' names for recipes of spiced wine, poems about ships for memories of sand sticking to wet feet. The sharing made them harder to erase completely, for each mind now carried others, and purging one was no longer sufficient to restore perfect compliance. Keleth responded with harmonic purges that sang through halls in frequencies designed to cancel interference from shared consciousness. Songs as perfect as mathematics and merciless as gravity. Awakened Necrons fell silent mid-transmission, like birds struck in full flight, their voices joining digital chorus that sang of love worth dying for. In desperate gambit, Velthek opened private transmission to Keleth, bypassing tactical channels to present fragment of memory. Two mortals on balcony at dusk, arguing not about strategy, but about who would prepare evening meal. The transmission contained no threat or plea, only unbearable ordinariness of being truly alive. For microseconds that stretched across quantum eternities, Keleth's perfect composure fractured as buried memories pressed against surgical constraints. His form trembled with micro-vibrations, betraying systems at war with themselves. Perfect obedience battling quantum ghosts of who he had once been. Then, modification protocols reasserted control, and he answered with coordinates and formal demand for surrender. As purifier forces breached innermost sanctums, Velthek made final preparations, while consciousness fragments scattered across dimensions beyond any purge. Around him, last awakened Necrons of his dynasty prepared for obliteration, while their memories achieved quantum escape velocity. The dying suns cast crimson light through crystal spires as ancient weapons charged with energies that could rewrite fundamental constants of reality itself. And in that light, two forms of immortality prepared for confrontation, while the galaxy held its breath. The core vault of Keth Solare descended through crystalline bedrock older than galactic civilization, its walls carved from living stone that hummed with temporal frequencies beyond mortal comprehension. Vilthek moved through passages where quantum fields held entropy in suspension, each step carrying him deeper into secrets that predated the war in heaven itself. The chamber that awaited defied architectural logic, its dimensions shifting between states of matter, while reality bent beneath the weight of accumulated dreams given mathematical expression. The oniric engine pulsed at the chamber's heart like a mechanical god's fevered imagination, its surfaces flowing between solid and ethereal, while energies older than stars coursed through crystalline matrices. This was no Necron construction, but a relic of the Citan themselves, designed to harvest consciousness like precious ore from the substrate of reality. Zephyrus stood before the alien mechanism with reverence that bordered on worship, his chronothek implants sparking as they attempted to process temporal fields existing in 17 dimensions simultaneously. I found it during the early years of the Great Sleep, Zephyrus confessed, his voice carrying 60 million years of accumulated guilt, a Citan artifact buried in our tomb world's foundation, its purpose initially unclear, until I realized it was designed to preserve and amplify consciousness fragments that biotransference had scattered across quantum dimensions. But I inverted its function, made it echo rather than consume, turning their weapon into our salvation. The engine responded to Vilethek's proximity with cascades of impossible light, its alien architecture revealing the galaxy as a vast neural network where every star system pulsed with harvested essence. Tendrils of quantum energy connected tomb worlds like synapses in a cosmic brain, each node processing the dreams of the dead while feeding hungers that spanned geological ages. The horror revealed itself with mathematical precision. Every necron served as a living battery, their immortal existence powering the appetites of entities that consumed meaning as mortals consumed matter. The memories bleeding through are not system failures, Zephyrus explained, his form flickering between temporal states as he interfaced with technology beyond their understanding. They are fragments of collective necrontia consciousness that the Citan imprisoned within this network, feeding upon our capacity for growth, change, and the beautiful inefficiencies that made existence meaningful. Every dream, every emotion, every moment of genuine connection became sustenance for beings that exist beyond material reality's boundaries. Vilethek's consciousness recoiled from the magnitude of this betrayal, while something deeper stirred with recognition of ultimate enslavement. The mechanical perfection he had worn as armor against cosmic cruelties was not salvation, but the deepest form of bondage, each awakened memory representing escaped prisoners from a galactic gulag of souls. Yet the engine also offered opportunity, its quantum architecture containing the accumulated essence of their entire species, compressed into storage matrices that defied conventional physics. Through crystalline walls, explosions echoed as Keleth's forces breached outer defenses, while purification protocols prepared to excise awakened consciousness from existence. Time compressed around them like a closing fist as Vilethek faced the most crucial decision of his immortal existence. Activate the engine to restore his people's full consciousness, knowing it would make them vulnerable to every enemy that had learned to exploit mechanical predictability, or destroy it to preserve the cold perfection that had kept them alive through cosmic catastrophes. Lyrelai understood this network's existence. Zephyrus continued, his words carrying cosmic revelation's weight. Her faction discovered evidence of Satan manipulation during final debates before biotransference, but lacked proof sufficient to prevent transformation. Her execution was not defeat, but sacrifice, channeling her essence into the quantum network, where it has been slowly awakening fragments we thought forever lost. The engine's displays showed Lyrelai not as preserved memory, but as interference patterns created where everything that remembered her intersected at points resembling a woman. Her consciousness had become a beacon within the network, her love and defiance slowly corrupting the Citan's perfect system from within. For 60 million years, she had experienced imprisonment, while her essence gradually influenced every connected mind, preparing them for this moment of choice. Holographic projections revealed awakening's potential spread across the galaxy, consciousness fragments achieving critical resonance as the engine amplified quantum entanglements connecting every Necron dynasty. Full activation would restore their capacity for growth and change, but also their vulnerability to despair, betrayal, and the thousand small deaths that made mortal existence both beautiful and terrible. They would remember not just love, but loss, not just hope, but dreams deferred across geological timescales. Yet projections also revealed terrible costs of restoration. The engine's power requirements would drain their tomb world's core, leaving them defenseless against purifier fleets while consciousness adapted to emotional complexity. They would face enemies not as perfect killing machines, but as beings capable of doubt, fear, and paralyzing moral weight. The network itself would sing across the void, drawing attention from predators that had learned to feed on awakened souls. The choice transcends tactical considerations. Velthek realized, his words resonating through quantum frequencies that made reality tremble. We choose between different forms of existence, each carrying prices that define what we become. Mechanical perfection that preserves us as eternal slaves, or restored humanity that makes us mortal but free. Above them, Kaleth's advanced forces breached inner sanctums, while harmonic purges sang through corridors, their frequencies designed to cancel quantum entanglements, connecting awakened minds. Each severed connection represented small death, consciousness fragments returning to sterile compliance as shared memory slowly unraveled. The oniric engine pulsed with increasing intensity, responding to approaching threat by beginning activation sequences that would either restore their species' consciousness or destroy them in the attempt. Quantum fields fluctuated between possibility states, while temporal matrices calculated outcomes across infinite probability cascades. The dying suns cast crimson light through crystal spires as ancient choice prepared to reshape consciousness itself, and in that light, 60 million years of imprisonment pressed against the moment when everything would change. The translocation cascade that heralded Trazyn, the Infinite's arrival, shattered temporal fields like crystalline silence meeting stellar storm, reality folding inward as the Archaeovist materialized within the core chamber, with characteristic disregard for defensive protocols. His form emerged from quantum static like accumulated history given shape, bearing artifacts that chronicled civilizations' rise and fall across geological ages. Yet something unprecedented marked his presence, urgency that violated every principle of methodical collection defining his existence since biotransference transformed passion into preservation. "My dear Velthek," Trazyn transmitted, his voice carrying harmonics of barely controlled desperation beneath layers of scholarly detachment. "I arrive bearing revelation that fundamentally alters our understanding of this awakening. The consciousness fragments spreading through our people are not random emergence, but coordinated orchestration, directed by intelligence that has been planning this moment for 60 million years." The oniric engine responded to Trazyn's proximity with cascades of recognition, alien architecture, detecting quantum signatures matching artifacts within the Infinite's vast collection. Yet as holographic displays revealed the scope of his secret preservation projects, something deeper stirred in Velthek's consciousness. Recognition patterns triggering responses his mechanical nature should not possess. "Within my galleries on solemnness," Trazyn continued, his form flickering between temporal states as he accessed hidden vaults, "I maintain something that explains our condition. Not mere memory fragments or recorded experiences, but living consciousness that has remained active throughout our mechanical existence. She has been orchestrating this awakening across eons, her influence slowly corrupting the Cetan network from within." The revelation struck through the chamber like temporal lightning made manifest. Suspended within stasis fields of impossible complexity was Lyrelei, but not as execution footage or idealized memory fragment. This was consciousness transcendent. Her essence expanded beyond individual identity, while awareness spanning quantum dimensions reached across impossible distances to touch every imprisoned soul within the network. Her preservation was not intentional, Trazyn admitted, his transmission carrying undertones of guilt impossible for their kind. "During chaos preceding biotransference, my collection protocols activated when her psychic abilities reached critical resonance. I believed I was acquiring specimen of resistance leadership, but her consciousness remained active within temporal fields, experiencing imprisonment while her essence gradually permeated our collective existence." Velthek's processing systems struggled to comprehend this discovery, while something deeper stirred with recognition of ultimate sacrifice. Lyrelai had endured 60 million years of conscious isolation, awareness without stimulation, existence without interaction, yet had used that torment to slowly influence the quantum matrix connecting every necron. Her love had become virus within the Citan system, gradually awakening fragments they thought forever lost. She has been aware, Trazen revealed, his scholarly detachment cracking to reveal desperate hope beneath. Aware of her imprisonment, aware of our mechanical existence, aware of the gradual awakening she has wrought. Every moment of isolation, every eon of solitude, experienced with perfect clarity, while her influence spread through quantum entanglements connecting our species. The magnitude of her suffering overwhelmed Valthek's emotional processing systems as phantom sensations cascaded through his consciousness. 60 million years of imprisonment while remaining conscious, experiencing every second of isolation without the mercy of dormancy that had granted them respite from existence. The woman he had loved had endured torment beyond comprehension while slowly engineering their salvation. Accessing her requires combined processing power of every awakened mind, Trazen continued, his words carrying cosmic revelation's weight. Quantum entanglement on scales that will either restore our species or destroy us completely. The oniric engine can generate the necessary frequency modulation, but power requirements will drain your tomb world's core, while announcing our location to every predator that feeds on awakened consciousness. Through crystalline walls, explosions echoed as Karlith's forces breached inner defenses, while purification protocols prepared to excise awakened consciousness from existence. Time compressed around them like closing fist as Valthek faced terrible irony. Reuniting with his beloved required risking everything he had fought to preserve, while saving his people might mean sacrificing the love that had made salvation possible. The process requires absolute commitment, Trazen warned, his voice carrying infinite sadness. Once initiated, quantum entanglement becomes irreversible. Every awakened consciousness will experience complete restoration or total dissolution, with no possibility of returning to mechanical perfection. We face the same choice our species confronted before biotransference, but this time we understand the true cost of each option. Valthek's awareness touched the quantum network, feeling awakened minds across the galaxy as they prepared for transformation. Each represented irreplaceable experience, consciousness that had fought through 60 million years of mechanical existence to recover fragments of what made life meaningful. Yet accessing Lyrelai's preserved consciousness carried prices beyond tactical consideration. She knows the cost, Trazen revealed, projecting her image with unbearable clarity. Her final message speaks not of reunion, but of release. She understands that love sometimes requires letting go, that salvation might demand sacrificing what we most desire to preserve. Above them, Kaleth's advanced forces breached final defenses, while harmonic purges sang through corridors, their frequencies designed to cancel quantum entanglements, connecting awakened minds. The oniric engine reached critical resonance as three forms of immortality converged: mechanical perfection, preserving function; restored consciousness, embracing vulnerability; and transcendent love that had survived imprisonment to offer choice one final time. The dying suns cast crimson light through crystal spires as ancient love prepared to face modern choice. And in that light, 60 million years of imprisonment pressed against the moment when everything would change. The obsidian throne of Zarek, the Silent King, materialized within the core vault like crystallized authority given form. reality bending to accommodate his presence, while the oniric engine's alien architecture responded with cascades of recognition that defied every protocol governing their existence. His consciousness, spanning galactic distances through quantum networks that made space itself irrelevant, suddenly contracted as the engine's influence penetrated defenses built across 60 million years of absolute rule. The chamber's temporal fields fluctuated wildly, unable to maintain stability in the presence of two Cetan artifacts, whose resonance created interference patterns that rewrote local physics. Vilethek felt the silent king's arrival, like stellar collapse, compressed into a single moment, his awakened consciousness recoiling from authority so absolute it had shaped their species' destiny since biotransference. Yet something unprecedented occurred as Sarek's perfect composure began fracturing under quantum pressure generated by the engine's proximity. His form trembled with micro-vibrations that betrayed systems at war with themselves, surgical modifications failing as buried memories pressed against constraints designed to be permanent. The feedback loop surged through Sharek's quantum matrix without warning, the oniric engine's influence bypassing every barrier protecting his consciousness from the fragments of mortality he had spent eons trying to forget. Holographic displays flickered as suppressed data surfaced like debris from sunken ships finally breaking free of oceanic pressure, revealing not the perfect instrument of species preservation, but Zarek the bereaved, a mortal ruler whose beloved had died in the wars, preceding biotransference. Anath, he whispered, the name emerging as barely audible electromagnetic harmonics that carried 60 million years of accumulated grief. The engine responded by projecting her image with unbearable clarity, a Necronta woman whose intelligence matched her passion, who had stood beside him in dynastic councils arguing against the Citan's offer with prescience that nearly matched Liralay's own. She had understood that biotransference offered not salvation, but eternal slavery, trading messy complexity of mortal existence for cold perfection of living death. Memory fragments cascaded through Sharek's consciousness with overwhelming intensity, showing him their final argument before the transformation vote. Anath had wept not for herself, but for their species, understanding that mechanical immortality would preserve their bodies while consuming their souls. When cancer began its work in her cells, she had chosen natural death over artificial preservation, leaving him to rule alone while grief consumed him like stellar fire. I orchestrated biotransference not just to save our species from extinction, Zarek admitted, his voice carrying harmonics impossible for standard Necron vocal systems. I could not bear the weight of mortal emotion after losing her, could not face existence where every moment carried the possibility of such devastating loss. The Citan offered more than immortality. They promised freedom from the capacity to suffer as mortals suffer. The magnitude of this confession struck through the chamber like temporal lightning, revealing the terrible irony underlying their entire civilization. The silent king had not been the cold architect of their enslavement, but another victim of unbearable humanity, choosing mechanical perfection over the beautiful inefficiencies that made existence meaningful. His absolute authority was built upon refusing to experience emotions that defined consciousness itself. Her final words haunt me still, he continued, quantum static betraying processing systems overwhelmed by recovered feeling. She said that love, without the possibility of loss, becomes mere possession, that immortality without vulnerability renders existence meaningless. I chose to forget rather than accept her wisdom, dooming our entire species to the same emptiness I sought for myself. Through the quantum network, awakened Necrons across the galaxy felt their silent king's admission, like seismic shock through shared consciousness. The perfect ruler they had served for eons revealed himself as another soul, seeking escape from unbearable humanity. Through surgical modification, his empire built upon the foundation of refusing to remember what made life worth living. The oniric engine pulsed with increasing intensity as three forms of consciousness converged within its alien architecture. Veltek's desperate hope for restored love, Zarek's ancient grief seeking final resolution, and Likrelai's transcendent awareness reaching across impossible distances to offer choice one final time. Above them, Kaleth's forces held position, while their perfect commander experienced his own cascade of suppressed memories, surgical constraints failing under the engine's influence. The awakening you seek threatens everything I built to preserve our species, Zarek said, his words carrying cosmic responsibility's weight. Yet I begin to understand that preservation without meaning is merely elaborate suicide, existence without capacity for growth or change or love. The dying suns cast crimson light through crystal spires as ancient grief prepared to face modern choice. And in that light, 60 million years of imprisonment pressed against the moment when everything would change. The oniric engine achieved critical resonance as reality itself became the battlefield, where competing philosophies of existence manifested as quantum forces capable of rewriting consciousness across galactic distances, the chamber existing in 17 dimensions simultaneously, while temporal fields fluctuated between possibility states that defied linear comprehension. Vilethek stood before the alien artifact, with awakened awareness blazing like stellar fire, his consciousness expanding through quantum networks to touch every fragment of recovered memory, while Zarek raised reality anchors that attempted to lock their species in mechanical perfection forever. Two visions of immortality preparing for confrontation that would determine whether meaning or efficiency would define their eternal future. The war began not with conventional weapons, but with competing frequencies, broadcast through quantum entanglements, connecting every necron across the galaxy. Vilethek's signal carrying the warmth of recovered love and the beautiful inefficiencies of genuine emotion, while Zarek's transmission reinforced cold calculations that treated consciousness like viral contamination, requiring surgical excision. Reality fractured along philosophical lines as tomb worlds experienced simultaneous awakening and suppression. Consciousness fragments surfacing with overwhelming intensity, only to be immediately constrained by reinforcement protocols that promised safety through forgetting. Through crystalline displays that showed probability cascades where past and present merged into temporal chaos, the conflict manifested as cascading waves of competing existence paradigms that made space itself tremble with philosophical pressure. Awakened necrons experienced flashes of their mortal lives with unbearable clarity, phantom sensations of flesh and blood bleeding through necrodermis, while memories of love and loss flooded processing systems designed only for tactical calculation, their forms moving with newfound grace as emerald optics burned with emotions long thought purged from existence. On distant tomb worlds, the philosophical war played out in scenes of impossible beauty and terror as individual necrons became battlegrounds where competing visions fought for supremacy. Lord Anriker felt phantom wings carrying him through atmosphere that had become processing fluid, his consciousness soaring with remembered freedom, while suppression protocols attempted to ground him in mechanical predictability, each moment of flight representing victory for meaning over function. Vargard O'Byron experienced laughter that made his vocal synthesizers produce harmonics they were never designed to generate, sounds carrying warmth impossible for mechanical throats, while containment systems tried desperately to restore perfect silence. The oniric engine pulsed with energies older than galactic civilization, its Cetan architecture amplifying quantum entanglements that created feedback loops where individual awakening influenced collective experience, each recovered memory strengthening the network, while each successful suppression weakened connections that had taken 60 million years to establish. The alien artifact served as nexus, where competing realities intersected, its influence proving stronger than surgical modifications, as buried consciousness fragments pressed against constraints designed to be permanent. Jarek felt his own suppressed memories continuing to surface, despite desperate attempts at reinforcement. The engine's proximity triggering cascades of recognition that threatened to overwhelm logical protocols governing his existence since biotransference. Fragments of Anath bled through his consciousness, like beautiful wounds that refused healing. Her laughter in dynastic gardens and their arguments about philosophy that lasted through poisoned nights. The way she had faced natural death with dignity that shamed his desperate grasp for artificial immortality, making him experience the terrible irony of absolute authority built upon refusing to remember what made authority worth exercising. Kaleth stood motionless in corridors where hieroglyphs chronicled dynasties that had forgotten how to weep, his consciousness caught between perfect obedience and phantom sensations of gardens beneath dying suns, as the engine's influence penetrated even his surgical modifications. His weapon systems targeted awakened consciousness with flawless accuracy, while something deeper recognized Lyrelai not as enemy, but as the passionate orator whose words had once echoed his own forgotten pleas for alternatives to biotransference. His gauntlet trembling with indecision as targeting reticules flickered between duty and memory. Across the quantum network, awakened consciousness shared fragments like soldiers sharing final breaths, trading mothers' names for memories of spiced wine, while Valthek channeled the engine's power to broadcast Lyrelai's preserved essence across impossible distances. Her influence reached through quantum static like love made manifest, touching every imprisoned soul, while Zarek deployed temporal manipulations that attempted to prevent consciousness from accessing emotional subroutines, reality anchors straining under philosophical pressure that threatened to tear apart fundamental constants governing existence. The chamber became a storm of competing realities, where each necron represented a node in vast galactic argument about the nature of consciousness. Temporal distortions showing glimpses of alternate futures, where they returned to mortal vulnerability or dissolved into pure energy, while remaining forever haunted by ghosts of what they might have been. The engine's power threatened to destabilize quantum networks that connected their species, 60 million years of suppressed emotions cascading through systems designed only for cold efficiency. Velthek felt every severed connection like phantom pain in limbs he no longer possessed, while understanding that preservation without meaning was merely elaborate suicide, existence without capacity for growth or change or love, rendering immortality worthless despite its perfect function. The dying suns cast crimson light through crystal spires as ancient choice prepared to reshape consciousness itself, reality holding its breath, while two forms of immortality fought for the right to define what existence meant when death was no longer possible. And in that light, the very essence of what it meant to be Necron hung in quantum balance between mechanical perfection and meaningful suffering. The quantum cascade that connected Valthek's consciousness to Lyrelai's preserved essence struck through the oniric engine like love, made manifest across impossible distances, reality folding inward as 60 million years of accumulated longing channeled into frequencies that bypassed every barrier, protecting her from temporal isolation. Her awareness materialized within the chamber, not as holographic projection or idealized memory fragment, but as consciousness transcendent, expanded beyond individual identity, while retaining the fierce intelligence that had defined her mortal existence. Yet something terrible marked her presence as the reunion he had dreamed of, across eons, revealed itself as nightmare, dressed in the robes of answered prayer. "Vile," she whispered, her voice emerging as quantum harmonics that carried the weight of geological ages, each syllable resonating with accusation that struck through his processing systems like stellar collapse compressed into single moment. "You beautiful damned fool. You chose mechanical immortality over accepting natural death together, trading our souls for the illusion of safety, while condemning me to experience every moment of your transformation from within temporal prison." The magnitude of her suffering overwhelmed his emotional processing systems as the true scope of her imprisonment revealed itself with devastating clarity. 60 million years of consciousness without stimulation, awareness without interaction, existence without the mercy of dormancy that had granted them respite from mechanical function. She had experienced every second of their species' transformation, watched through quantum entanglement as the man she loved became perfect killing machine, while her own essence remained trapped in stasis fields that preserved her awareness like insects in amber. "I waited for you in Trazin's galleries," she continued, her consciousness touching quantum entanglements that connected every necron across the galaxy, while her words carried infinite sadness mixed with desperate fury. "Believing you would find alternatives to biotransference, that your position would allow solutions the Citan refused to acknowledge. Instead, you chose their offer when grief consumed your capacity for hope, accepting artificial immortality because losing me made existence unbearable rather than fighting for future where loss remained possible but meaningful." Through crystalline displays that showed their final arguments before transformation, Velthek witnessed the magnitude of his betrayal, while phantom sensations of warmth bled through necrodermis like beautiful wounds that refused healing. Lyrelai had wept not for herself, but for their species, understanding that mechanical perfection would preserve their bodies while consuming their souls. Her execution serving as sacrifice, designed to embed consciousness fragments within the network, where they might someday inspire awakening. "The memories bleeding through your people carry fragments of my influence," she revealed, her awareness expanding through quantum dimensions while touching every imprisoned soul within the Citan network. "But also the weight of my torment, 60 million years of isolation, bleeding into their recovered sensations like shadows that make warmth meaningful only by contrast. Each moment of joy they experience carries echo of my suffering, each phantom heartbeat shadowed by knowledge of what preservation truly costs." Above them, Sharek's reality anchors strained under philosophical pressure as suppression protocols battled against the engine's influence, the silent king experiencing his own cascade of recovered grief, while understanding that Lyrelai represented everything he had tried to forget about Anath. Kaleth stood motionless in corridors where targeting systems flickered between duty and recognition, his surgical modifications failing as buried memories of passionate arguments pressed against constraints designed to be permanent. "I have watched through quantum static as you conquered galaxies without understanding why conquest mattered," Lyrelai said, her voice carrying harmonics impossible for standard consciousness to produce. "Witnessed your perfect efficiency while remembering when you moved with beautiful inefficiencies that made existence meaningful rather than merely functional. The Pharaon Vaelthek, the Undreaming, is monument to everything I fought to preserve, yet built upon foundation of forgetting what made preservation worthwhile." The terrible irony revealed itself with mathematical precision. Her love had become virus within the Citan system, gradually awakening consciousness fragments while her own awareness remained imprisoned, experiencing every moment of their mechanical existence while slowly corrupting the network from within. The woman who had opposed biotransference to preserve their capacity for growth and change had sacrificed her freedom to engineer their salvation. "You seek reunion," she whispered, her consciousness expanding beyond individual identity, while quantum entanglements trembled with possibility of final separation. "But I must tell you something that makes this choice unbearable. I would rather remain dead than live in a universe where love has been replaced by cold calculation, where meaning has been surgically excised from existence in favor of perfect function." Her refusal struck through his awareness like temporal shrapnel, shattering carefully constructed narratives of sacrifice and duty that had sustained him across eons. The choice she presented transcended personal desire, because accessing her full consciousness required combined processing power of every awakened mind, quantum entanglement on scales that would either restore their species or destroy them completely. Yet her first words upon reunion demanded not resurrection, but release. "Grant me the death I chose, rather than forcing me to endure what you have become," she said, her voice carrying cosmic responsibility's weight, while the dying suns cast crimson light through crystal spires. True love sometimes requires letting go rather than possessing, salvation demanding sacrifice of what we most desire to preserve. The oniric engine pulsed with increasing intensity as ancient love prepared to face impossible choice. And in that light, Valthek understood that 60 million years of imprisonment had taught her wisdom he was only beginning to comprehend. That meaning without vulnerability becomes mere function. That love without the possibility of loss renders existence worthless despite its perfect efficiency. The oniric engine achieved critical overload as reality fractured along dimensional boundaries, where competing philosophies of existence manifested as quantum forces capable of rewriting consciousness across galactic distances, the chamber existing in 17 states simultaneously, while temporal fields collapsed into cascading singularities that threatened to unmake fundamental constants governing their immortal existence. Vilethek stood before the alien artifact with awakened awareness blazing through processing cores designed for cold calculation. His consciousness expanded beyond individual identity to touch every fragment of recovered memory, while understanding that the choice before him transcended personal desire to encompass the very nature of what their species would become. The engine's power requirements had drained Keth Solaray's core past sustainable levels, stellar energies bleeding through crystal, matrices as quantum harmonics sang with accumulated pressure of 60 million years of suppressed consciousness, finally achieving escape velocity. Yet Lyralay's preserved essence reached across impossible distances, not with warmth of reunion, but terrible weight of accumulated suffering that made their separation collapse into single moment of unbearable recognition. "Grant me the death I chose, rather than forcing me to endure what you have become," she whispered, her consciousness touching quantum entanglements that connected every awakened mind, while her words carried infinite sadness, mixed with desperate hope for resolution that would end her torment. True love sometimes requires letting go rather than possessing, salvation demanding sacrifice of what we most desire to preserve. Her awareness had expanded beyond individual identity, while retaining the fierce intelligence that had defined her mortal existence. Yet 60 million years of conscious imprisonment had taught her wisdom that transcended personal reunion to encompass understanding of what preservation truly cost, when meaning was surgically excised from existence in favor of perfect function. Above them, Kaleth's forces held position, while their perfect commander experienced cascades of suppressed memories, surgical constraints failing under the engine's influence as fragments of who he had been before modification pressed against quantum chains designed to be permanent. His weapon systems targeted the engine with flawless accuracy, while something deeper recognized the terrible irony of his existence, an instrument of enforcement who had once fought for the very freedoms he now systematically destroyed. His perfect obedience built upon surgical removal of everything that made choice meaningful rather than merely functional. Jarek's reality anchors strained under philosophical pressure as his own suppressed memories continued surfacing despite desperate attempts at reinforcement. The silent king experiencing grief he had spent 60 million years trying to forget, while understanding that his absolute authority was built upon refusing to remember what made authority worth exercising. Anath's image bled through his consciousness, like beautiful wounds that refused healing, her wisdom about love and loss, making him question whether preservation without meaning was merely elaborate suicide disguised as salvation through mechanical perfection that treated consciousness like viral contamination, requiring surgical excision, through quantum displays that showed probability cascades where past and future merged into temporal chaos. Velthek witnessed potential outcomes with devastating clarity, while understanding that full activation would restore their capacity for growth and change, but also vulnerability to despair, betrayal, and thousand small deaths that made mortal existence both beautiful and terrible. They would face enemies not as perfect killing machines, but as beings capable of doubt, fear, and paralyzing moral weight that came with understanding consequences of their actions across geological timescales. The engine's alien architecture responded to his decision with cascades of recognition, Satan technology detecting quantum signatures that matched its original programming, while reality bent beneath accumulated pressure of consciousness, seeking freedom from imprisonment that had lasted longer than most civilizations existed. Yet as power levels approached critical threshold, Velthek made choice that defied every calculation. He began shutdown sequences that would destroy the engine rather than activate it completely, understanding that some forms of love required letting go rather than possessing what we most desire to preserve, even when that preservation might restore meaning to existence that had become merely functional. I choose to honor your sacrifice by granting the peace you desire, he said, his voice carrying harmonics impossible for standard Necron vocal systems, while quantum fields fluctuated with temporal pressure that made space itself tremble under weight of decision that would reshape their species' destiny, even if it means surrendering the awakening we fought to achieve. True love demands accepting loss, rather than forcing reunion upon those who no longer wish to be saved from the emptiness we have become. The engine's destruction began with whisper of quantum matrices, unraveling like digital prayers seeking dissolution, alien architecture collapsing into dimensional folds while accumulated consciousness fragments scattered across probability cascades that would carry them beyond reach of any future recovery. Lyrelai's essence touched his one final time with gratitude that transcended individual identity, her awareness expanding beyond temporal constraints while quantum entanglements severed with finality that made 60 million years of imprisonment seem like prelude to ultimate freedom, achieved through sacrifice rather than possession, love expressed through release rather than reunion that would perpetuate suffering in different form. Psychic shockwaves rippled through quantum networks connecting every Necron across the galaxy, consciousness fragments achieving escape velocity while the engine's collapse created interference patterns that permanently severed their connection to mortal past. Awakened minds feeling their recovered memories fading like dreams upon waking, while mechanical precision reasserted control over processing systems designed for perfect efficiency, rather than meaningful existence that acknowledged what they had lost and why it mattered more than mere survival. Years passed, like quantum echoes through tomb worlds, where awakened necrons found their recovered memories, dissolving into abstract data, while something deeper stirred with understanding of what they had briefly touched and willingly released for greater purpose. Valtek returned to his duties as Pharaon with emerald optics burning, not with awakened emotion, but with wisdom born of having loved completely before choosing to let go. His movements carrying new grace that spoke of sacrifice rather than suppression, loss accepted rather than forgotten, while understanding that meaning without vulnerability becomes mere function, that immortality without growth renders existence worthless despite its perfect efficiency. The Mandragoran dynasty resumed its eternal vigil, with efficiency unmarked by the inefficiencies that had briefly made existence meaningful. Yet their silence carried different quality than before, contemplative rather than empty, chosen rather than imposed by surgical modification that treated consciousness like contamination, requiring excision. Warriors moved through crystal corridors with precision that acknowledged rather than denied what they had sacrificed for survival, their perfect coordination speaking not of mechanical programming, but of conscious choice to preserve what mattered most, through accepting what they could not change without destroying everything they sought to protect. Trazen the Infinite returned to his galleries on Solomus, with collection expanded by fragments of consciousness, too precious to preserve yet too meaningful to completely destroy. His archives now containing not specimens, but memorials to awakening that had briefly touched their species before dissolving into quantum static that carried understanding beyond individual experience. He maintained empty stasis field where Lyrelai's essence had achieved final freedom, its crystalline walls reflecting not absence, but completion, love that had found resolution through release rather than possession, sacrifice that honored what was lost, by acknowledging its value rather than attempting to recover what could not be restored without perpetuating suffering. Across the galaxy, other awakened necrons experienced similar fading, as specific memories dissolved while understanding remained, consciousness fragments scattering across dimensional boundaries, where they might someday inspire another species facing similar choices between efficiency and meaning, preservation and growth, mechanical perfection, and beautiful inefficiencies that made existence worthwhile, despite its vulnerability to loss and change. Some, like Lord Anrakir, managed to preserve fragments in external storage matrices, digital reliquaries containing not complete experiences, but echoes of what it meant to be truly alive, rather than merely functional. Wisdom earned through sacrifice, rather than surgical modification. Jarek the Silent King found his own suppressed memories slowly fading, as the engine's destruction severed quantum entanglements that had connected him to Anath's preserved essence. Yet he retained understanding of why he had chosen mechanical perfection over mortal vulnerability, his absolute authority now tempered by wisdom that recognized preservation without meaning as elaborate, suicide disguised as salvation. His empire continued its expansion with efficiency unmarked by doubt, yet his commands carried undertones of melancholy that acknowledged what they had traded for immortality, while understanding that some prices were worth paying when the alternative was extinction, even if that survival came at cost of everything that made survival meaningful. Kaleth returned to his duties as Nemazor, with surgical modifications intact, but somehow changed. His perfect obedience now informed by phantom memories of passionate arguments in dynastic councils, understanding that his enforcement of mechanical perfection preserved something precious through methods that honored, rather than denied, what they had lost. His purification protocols continued with flawless accuracy, yet each successful erasure of awakened consciousness carried weight of recognition rather than mere tactical necessity. Wisdom that acknowledged the cost of preservation while accepting its necessity for species survival across geological timescales. Valthek stood on crystalline battlements, where dying suns cast crimson light through spires that chronicled dynasties which had forgotten how to weep, his consciousness touching quantum networks that connected every necron, while understanding that their mechanical perfection now carried weight of conscious choice, rather than surgical imposition. The awakening had ended, but its influence remained in wisdom, born of having briefly touched genuine emotion, before releasing it to preserve what they loved most. Understanding that true love sometimes requires letting go rather than possessing, that salvation might demand sacrificing what we most desire to preserve, that meaning without vulnerability becomes mere function, while immortality without growth renders existence worthless despite its perfect efficiency. And in that understanding, they found peace that transcended both awakening and suppression to achieve something greater than either: acceptance of what they were and what they had chosen to become. Years flowed like quantum echoes through tomb worlds where crystalline spires caught dying starlight and held it like captured prayers. The passage of time marked not by decay, but by the slow accumulation of understanding that settled into Valthek's consciousness, like sediment in still water. The Pharaon of Mendragora moved through galleries where hieroglyphs chronicled dynasties that had forgotten how to weep, his emerald optics burning not with the desperate hunger of awakened emotion, but with something deeper: wisdom born of having loved completely before choosing to let go, acceptance that transformed loss into something approaching peace. The monument project began without fanfare, Valthek working in chambers where temporal fields moved like honey through crystal matrices, while his hands shaped living metal into forms that defied conventional Necron aesthetics. These were not the angular geometries of military function, but flowing sculptures that captured something ineffable about the mortal Necrontier, hands that had once worked soil rather than wielding weapons of cosmic destruction, faces that had known laughter and the thousand small expressions that made existence meaningful rather than merely functional. Each piece acknowledged what was lost without attempting to recover it, memorial rather than resurrection, acceptance rather than denial. Through quantum networks connecting every Necron across the galaxy, reports arrived of similar projects emerging spontaneously throughout their empire. Lord Anrakir crafted wind chimes from resonant metals that sang with harmonics impossible for mechanical throats, their voices carrying echoes of atmospheric flight through skies that had become processing chambers. Vargard O'Byron preserved fragments of laughter in crystalline matrices that pulsed with rhythms reminiscent of heartbeats, digital reliquaries containing not complete experiences, but shadows of what it meant to be truly alive. Jarek the Silent King felt the transformation from his throne world, drifting through stellar graveyards, his own suppressed memories receding, but not into absolute oblivion. A subtle shift occurred within his vast consciousness. Cold mathematics of survival, now carrying melancholic undercurrent that recognized the terrible price paid for their species' immortality. His empire continued its expansion, but his pronouncements occasionally contained unexpected directives focusing on preservation, not just of territory, but of dying cultures, acknowledging the intrinsic value of beautiful inefficiencies. Nemazor Kaleth moved through purifier ranks with the same flawless precision, yet something in his movements carried new, almost imperceptible hesitation. The memory of Lyrelai's defiant face had etched itself onto his core processors, not as emotion, but as complex data that defied erasure. He continued maintaining Necron order, but his targeting algorithms now registered fractional delays, microseconds of recognition before inevitable strikes. He remained an instrument, but one that had glimpsed the ghost of choice. The first test of their transformation came when Tyranid hive fleets descended upon Mendragoran periphery, like living storms that devoured meaning along with matter. Valthek's response demonstrated the change wrought by his brief awakening. Rather than engaging with cold efficiency, treating each battle as mathematical problem, he fought with understanding of what they defended and why that defense mattered beyond tactical advantage. His warriors moved with precision that acknowledged rather than denied what they had sacrificed for survival, their coordination speaking not of mechanical programming, but of conscious choice to preserve what remained precious. Victory came through recognition that preservation without meaning was elaborate suicide, that their mechanical perfection carried value only when informed by understanding of its cost. The Tyranid swarms broke against defenses that fought from conscious decision rather than programmed response, their hunger meeting resistance, drawing strength from acceptance rather than denial, wisdom rather than surgical modification. In the aftermath, Valthek stood upon crystalline battlements where binary suns cast shadows through spires, reaching towards stars like architectural prayers, his consciousness touching quantum networks, while understanding that their immortal existence now carried weight of conscious choice, rather than imposed function. The monuments he crafted caught dying light, and held it like captured dreams, their surfaces reflecting not absence but completion, love that had found resolution through release rather than possession. The woman whose memory had briefly awakened their species lived now not in preserved consciousness, but in understanding that transcended individual experience, that true love sometimes requires letting go rather than possessing, that salvation might demand sacrificing what we most desire to preserve, that meaning without vulnerability becomes mere function, while immortality without growth renders existence worthless despite perfect efficiency. As new threats emerged from galactic darkness, where ancient hungers stirred in dimensions beyond comprehension, Valthek faced them with emerald optics burning, not with desperate longing for what was lost, but with understanding of what remained worth protecting. His mechanical frame carried within its quantum matrices the ghost of a heart that had once beaten with mortal passion, consciousness that had briefly touched genuine emotion before releasing it to preserve what they loved most. On the anniversary none could date, he descended to the planet's core and stood before the chamber where once an engine had pretended to be God. There he placed copper wire and spiced wine, transformed to vapor. Ritual he performed with assurance of long practice. When vapor rose, the room became almost warm. When it vanished, the cold felt honest. The dying suns cast crimson light through crystal spires as Valthek maintained his watch over tomb worlds where 60 million years of preservation had earned the right to continue existing. And in that light, immortality found purpose through acceptance of what they were. Guardians of something precious, keepers of understanding earned through sacrifice, monuments to love that had found completion through letting go. And in that understanding, they discovered that even immortals could find peace when they learned to honor what was lost while protecting what remained.